in a few hours. Fasten your seatbelts. The next 24 hours in Mississippi are going to be interesting. Joining me now are Democratic strategist Angela Rye and Jamel Bowie, staff writer for Slate. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Rev.
Thank you.
Jamel, 50 years after Freedom Summer, poll watchers are in Mississippi. What's your reaction?
My reaction is the same as yours. It's just blatant voter intimidation. There's no reason to have sort of these independent, unaccountable poll watchers brought in just immediately after Senator Cochran announced it was reported he was reaching out to African-American voters. No reason to have them there other than for intimidation. And in fact, there's research to show that if there's one way to get voters to not vote, to get people to feel uncomfortable and anxious and stressed out about voting, it's to have poll watchers checking credentials, making sure people are citizens. And you know that these poll watchers are not going to be checking, I mean, to be perfectly honest, they're not going to be checking white voters to see if they're properly credentialed. They're going to be checking black voters.
Angela, we've seen more of these poll-watching groups come up from the right in the last several years, and it has really become more and more and more obvious. And what they have apparently been doing, according to all the reports that we've seen, is an increased amount of interrogation leaning toward intimidation. Your thoughts?
Sure. I think first and foremost, dealing with Mississippi poll watchers, the irony of this happening during the anniversary of Freedom Summer. 50 years ago, we were dealing with, or the country was dealing with, voter intimidation and threats from the Ku Klux Klan in Mississippi. And today, we're dealing with this runoff. And I just can't even imagine what Mississippi voters must be thinking. It's not irony, Rev, that the Mississippi has the highest black electorate in the country as reported after the 2012 exit polls. It's no mistake that this is a country that was, a state that was covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act and needed to be pre-cleared. This is case in point for why this state needs to be covered by the Voting Rights Act, and all the more while Congress needs to act on the Voting Rights Act amendment, because Section 4 being gutted does not bode Mississippi, particularly black Mississippi voters, very well at all.
Now, Jamel, you were writing about Cochran's attempt to reach out to African-American voters. You wrote, and I'm quoting you, "If there was a time to support Cochran, now is it. If I were voting in Mississippi, I'd swallow my partisanship and cast a ballot for Thad Cochran. He's not a great choice, but given the circumstances, he's probably the best one." Do you see Cochran as the lesser of two evils?
Yes. The difference between Cochran and McDaniel is that Cochran isn't as rigidly ideological, right? McDaniel was against all government, all spending, everything that could possibly come to the federal government. Cochran's certainly a conservative, but he's also the kind of guy who's bring billions of dollars in funds and projects to a state. And that's someone you can work with, and that's someone who you can cut deals with. That's someone that you might have leverage over if you end up being responsible for him going back to the Senate. Now, this would be different if the Democrat in the race in the general election, Childers, stood like a very good chance of winning, but I'm not sure that he does. So in that case, why not vote for Cochran? And like I said, it's not the best choice available, but it might be the right one for this particular circumstance.
But Angela, wouldn't the Democrats' chances be better if you had an extremist like McDaniel as the Republican nominee? Wouldn't that drive out a lot of people in the middle and a lot of Democrats?
It could, Rev, but it also does run a huge risk. Because he is so ideologically off base, he could rev up the base in Mississippi there. We know that the country has become increasingly polarized racially over the last several years, surprised because we have a black man in the White House. I think even though Thad Cochran getting Democratic votes could help his chances, it very well could, the problem is the folks that would most likely be voting to support Thad Cochran would automatically be ineligible because they all voted in that Democratic primary a couple of weeks back, so they're not eligible to vote in the runoff. Something could happen, and I think the one good thing on his side is I've heard that absentee ballots are up for this particular runoff, so that is definitely something in Thad Cochran's favor.
Now, Jamel, McDaniel supporters say they're going to they're going to take full advantage of the fact that Mississippi is welcoming poll watching. but the Department of Justice says it's paying attention. It put out this statement. The department is aware of concerns about voter intimidation and is monitoring the situation. Voters that experience problems are encouraged to call 1-800-253-3931. Why is this kind of poll watching so intimidating, Jamal?
It's because it's not being done, or probably won't be being done in the spirit of sort of trying to get the most open and I guess legitimate elections. What they're there for, what they were called in for, is in response to the fact that Cochran's reaching out to traditionally Democratic voters. And when that's the circumstance, it's just going to seem intimidating. I mean, I vote very regularly, and if I went to the polls and someone, aggressively asked me to see my ID card, to see any identification, I would feel intimidated, and I'm like an educated guy who votes, right? Yeah. So I have to imagine that if A, this is an unusual circumstance, you are voting in a Republican primary, and B, you're not used to this, then you're just going to feel intimidated.
All right,
why didn't they watch when they were busting in the courthouse?
I'm going to have to leave it there. Angela Ryan, Jamel Bowie, thank you both for your time tonight.
Thanks, Rev.
Thank you.
Coming up, a story not getting enough attention. A human rights crisis happening right now in the city.